Hello, everybody, and welcome to Climate Voters Tonight. Welcome, everybody. We're just going to give folks a couple seconds to get situated, and then we will begin our program. Great to have everybody back tonight on Climate Voters Tonight. All right, well, welcome to our latest episode. I'm your host, Peter Schleisman. As always, we've got a great program for you today. In our first segment, we're going to cover some of the headlines. Then we're going to recap a recent event that we held on sustainable living and summer plans. And finally, we'll break down the potent heat-trapping gas, methane. But first, let's dive right into the headlines. Whether you live in Phoenix, Houston, or here in Washington, July was hot, like historically hot. And it's likely to get even hotter because of climate change. To heal our planet for us and future generations, we must quickly reduce climate pollution. But Senate Republicans are actively opposed to making the necessary reductions in climate pollution from power plants. Help us make a better world a reality. Go to edfaction.org/power plants by August 8th to show support for EPA's big plans to cut climate pollution. On the brighter side, we are partnering with climate change makers on Monday, August 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern for a special hour of action. We will have an inspiring special guest and learn about a new federal program, Solar for All, which will help communities across the U.S. gain access to solar power. Moving on. In case you missed it, we recently held a virtual event on ways you can still enjoy this scorching summer that are climate friendly. Our amazing guests gave travel tips, plant-based recipes, and more. While the steps we take in our everyday lives won't solve the climate crisis alone, we really need our government and the private sector to lead the way. Every little bit does count. That's why we're encouraging folks to take the small steps in their lives while advocating for the big steps and the big change we need to see. Now we're going to roll the tape.
Program today with a discussion on tips for sustainable activities, recipes, and party planning. We're joined by an influencer who works every day to share content focused on living a climate-conscious life. I'm really excited to welcome Shelby Orme. We're so happy to have you, Shelby. Thanks again for joining us, and we are going to go ahead and dive into a few questions. So first, we know that summer is a really fun time to participate in outdoor activities and also to try new things. So I'm curious what ideas you have for our viewers on sustainable or climate-friendly activities to try this summer.
So one of the things I highly recommend doing this summer, if you can, is just hosting a potluck with your neighbors. Like getting to know your neighbors and sharing food is like a really simple, low-impact thing you can do to build community and also have fun this summer. And at that potluck, maybe you use local food. And the third thing that I really recommend doing is supporting your local parks, all the way from like a small city park up until if you have any national parks where you live, state parks. Those things are really important for conservation, preservation of public lands, which is, as you may be familiar with, conserving like natural spaces is really important for our fight against climate change. And so if you make a donation there, or if there's an entrance fee, you're contributing to those positive things. So on my bucket list this year is to visit 3 new state parks. Maybe that's something you add to your summer bucket list.
That's great. Well, my next question, Shelby, I'll share that some of our viewers that are with us today may have not yet begun their sustainability journey. So for those that are just starting to consider how they can make their lives more sustainable or make more climate conscious choices day to day, what advice do you have?
You know, I've been at this for like over a decade at this point, and I've been every type of environmentalist, right? Like I've been the naggy environmentalist that no one wants to be around, and I don't advocate to be that type of environmentalist anymore. And I've been the environmentalist who tried to be perfect and fit all of my waste in a jar, that sort of vibe. These days I have this motto. It's called do your best and advocate for the rest. And I think a really important part of that as you're like embarking on this journey is like, don't try to do everything at once. Take it like step by step. And also in the beginning, rather than midway through your journey like me, acknowledge the systemic things that like are against us in the society that we currently live in, to being perfect environmentalists or climate neutral or all these terms that are thrown around. It's really not possible for you to do tomorrow, and recognizing that and then advocating in areas that are out of your control.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Shelby, those are all the questions I had for you today. We thank you so much for joining us and for doing the great work of spreading sustainability content and resources. And thank you again for being with us and for sharing with our audience. Awesome. Well, now we're going to transition into a discussion on sustainable and eco travel. Earlier this week, I sat down with two awesome eco travel experts, Rose and Shivya. The first question I have for you both: why is it important to make sustainable travel choices?
I think that travel has a really singular ability to open our eyes to the beauty and the majesty of our world. It teaches us, it puts us in touch with our own humanity and our sort of connection to not just other humans, but other species and just the beautiful world we live in. And, as amazing as travel is, it also is associated with harmful, negative environmental and social impacts. So it's just really important to be mindful that, at its best, power actually has the potential and the ability to sort of preserve the beautiful cultures and environments that we visit. But when not done consciously, it can be a detriment to those things.
So if someone's interested in making sustainable travel choices and taking that step, where do you recommend they start?
Well, the good thing is a lot of this information is a lot more accessible than it used to be. So even if you look on Google Flights, it's going to give you a sense of whether the itinerary you're looking at is sort of higher emissions or lower emissions than the standard for that particular route. So that's a great place to start. And then just to kind of remember as a general rule of thumb that, shorter haul flights tend to be the most carbon intensive. So when you're planning a trip somewhere, it's really great to think about how you can stay in one place longer. And again, this goes back to something that Shivya said, that really does make for a better trip experience.
Yeah, so I think one great way to get started is to, even before looking at transport options, is to think about the choice of destination. And I think what we're seeing right now is that, Instagram creates so much FOMO, or even TikTok and the rest of social media threads and whatnot. And a lot of times we just want to go to a place because, we see all these pretty pictures and everyone's posting about it. So it feels like we should be there as well. But I think we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, why are we traveling somewhere? And then also, do we have an option to visit this place in off season, or maybe ditch that popular place and go somewhere that's under the radar? Because I know it's not fair to compare destinations, but like for example, going to a place like Tajikistan, which receives very little tourism, will have a much deeper impact on the local economy and the money you spend there as a tourist. But also the kind of cultural interactions you have will be a lot more authentic than, let's say, going to a place which is plagued by over tourism, like a European city like Amsterdam or Berlin. So really thinking about the choice of destination makes a huge difference.
So that's fantastic. The next question I have is about booking places to stay and accommodations. What are your tips for finding or booking sustainable accommodation options in the destinations that folks are traveling to?
A lot of times we just go for the comfortable option, which is like maybe a chain hotel because we know exactly the kind of experience to expect. But I could stay in like a big chain hotel in, say, New Delhi or in the US, and the experience will be more or less the same. And I think when you pick something local, something that's maybe family run or community run or boutique, then you tend to have a more wholesome experience of the destination. So I remember a few years ago, I traveled to Bali and I stayed in this in a really sweet eco lodge on the outskirts of Ubud. And so they had like a huge private, reserve that they had protected and built with local materials. And they were also really socially involved with the community. But the really cool thing was that they also had a private waterfall within the reserve. And they used that waterfall to generate hydroelectricity, which powered the lodge. So it was actually really, low carbon, but also really immersive, and a really, it's such a beautiful experience of Bali, and really experiencing the nature within the islands. So just choosing local is so much more powerful, both on a personal level and on an environmental level as well.
Apologies. I think I was muted. I will start again. We're going to talk about methane pollution for a couple of minutes here. Methane is a powerful heat-trapping gas. It vanishes relatively quickly from the atmosphere, but in the short term, it is about 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide in warming the planet, according to the EPA. Methane pollution comes from an array of sources, including landfills and livestock. Oil and gas operations are a particularly big culprit, responsible for nearly 30% of all emissions in the United States. Cutting methane pollution is therefore one of the fastest and most cost-effective ways of slowing the rate of global warming in the near term. That's why it's critical that EPA use all the tools in its toolbox to reduce methane pollution. And that's what voters in key battleground and oil and gas producing states want. We recently teamed up with Earthworks Action Fund, Sierra Club, and CATF Action to poll voters' states about proposed EPA safeguards to reduce methane pollution from oil and gas operations. The results are jaw-dropping. More than 2/3 of voters in these states are in favor of more stringent measures to limit methane pollution from the oil and gas industry. The proposed measures include regular inspection of leaks at oil and gas wells, monitoring large pollution events known as super emitters, and implementing stricter equipment standards. The poll also shows that voters support even stronger EPA limits on methane pollution from flaring. The idea is so popular that we're even seeing robust support in Texas, the largest oil and gas producing state in the nation. With such overwhelming support for strong action to cut methane pollution, the only question is, what are we waiting for? These poll results send a clear message. Voters in battleground and key oil and gas producing states want meaningful action to reduce methane pollution. They recognize the urgency of the climate crisis and want the federal government to do something about it. We will continue to closely monitor developments on this issue and keep you informed. For now, you can make your voice heard on the need to cut methane pollution by going to edfaction.org/cutmethane. All right, that is all from us tonight. Despite talking on mute for about 2 minutes, we are actually going to finish directly on time, which might be a first for us. I'm not going to lie. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, Climate Voters Unite.